Hey everyone. So while this may not be a lot of people's cup of tea, this vehicle, this is something I've been working on for a while, and I thought I'd make a quick video. And I've had a couple friends now encourage me to do so. So I'll try to go into the personal story of this car, maybe a couple interesting facts you may not know about these cars, and what's going on here. So you're looking at a 1984 300ZX 2+2 GL. It is a 5-speed non-turbo. The car was purchased at, so the paperwork I have is it appears that my grandfather put a deposit down in January or February of 1984. And then they didn't receive the car until November of 1984. These were a popular vehicle. They built a lot of the Z31 chassis. I know they're a bit polarizing in the car community, but they did. This was the most numerous of the Z cars, like it or not. And so, yeah, they received it. I was there on the day they received it, and I'll throw in a couple pictures. So I'm guessing this was a custom order for my grandfather. I don't have any proof of that. I do have all the original sales receipts. It was bought from Reed Dotson in Orlando, Florida, who is still in business as Reed Nissan. I doubt they would have that information, nor should they share it with me, given the privacy issues that come with that. He paid out the door $17,500 for the car. The car itself was $16,500, and then, ancillary fees, and a couple add-ons he bought. It looks like he bought an undercoating on the car, which is still all over the car, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The car is currently showing 10,131 miles, and we'll go ahead and look inside of it. It was essentially a 30th wedding anniversary for my grandmother. Now, I have some questions about how much for her it really was, and I'll tell you why real quick. Not to disparage the deceased. I loved my grandfather very much. My understanding was that in 1984, that's when the first year of the C4 was out as well, he was interested in a red C4 Corvette, and he was a tall man, and if you've ever been in a C4 Corvette, they have a really high door sill. And also the targa top that he was probably looking at, he probably just did not fit in that car. The Z, even though it's a smaller car, is more cushy and roomy. These are arguably not really a sports car in my mind. It's a grand touring car. And I think we'll get into that in a little bit here in a second, but I think that does make them a bit of a polarizing car. A lot of people get disappointed at the specs on these. And there's some other cars in that class that I've owned, like Mazda RX-8 and stuff, where it's like, oh, it's not a sports car and it's not fast. Really wasn't what it was about. So yeah, that's kind of the history of the car. It's basically sat in my grandparents' garage forever. And then my grandfather passed on, sadly, in 2014. And you can tell he wasn't feeling well a couple years before he passed, and I knew that anyway, but the records just kind of abruptly stopped in 2012 on this car. He had been kind of religiously maintaining it, and he just always kept records on everything. That's just the man he was. And shortly, I'm going off my best memory here. So he died at the end of 2014. My grandmother broke her hip at some point not too far after that, and the understanding I always got from my grandmother was pushing the clutch from then on in the car was a struggle for her, and really the car languished from there. The past, we'll call it 9 to 10 years, it's been sitting in my wonderful aunt's garage. She is into cars, but it just sat there. Thankfully it was indoors, but it was just sitting in the garage. Thankfully, someone did have the foresight to disconnect the 12-volt battery. Sadly, the fuel was still in the car, and again, we'll go through that as well. So some interesting facts about this car that were a surprise to me. First of all, the Z31 was launched in Japan in 1983. We got it a model year later. It had some interesting stuff from 1983. It wasn't the first to it by any means, but it was the first from Nissan on some stuff. Number one, it's the first Japanese production V6 engine in any car. They use this engine in a lot of stuff, from pickups to Pathfinders to you name it over the years. It was a long-lived engine. It's nothing special. It is a 3-liter single overhead cam V6. But the interesting stuff to me for a 1983 released vehicle, in Japan anyway, is it is port fuel injected, which, you know, having owned a bunch of 80s cars, you know, was pretty surprising to me. And they're top feed injectors like you would expect on some semi-modern port fuel injected car. It is not sequentially injected. They fire in batch. They either fire, depends on the operating conditions, but they fire either left, right bank, or all at the same time, depending on the scenario that is going on at the time and what the ECU thinks it needs. Return style fuel system. What else? Oh, it has a hot wire MAF, which for me in 1983 is, I didn't even know that was a thing yet. I'm sure that, you know, somebody else was too at first. But it was a surprise to me on this car. I can tell you that as a child, when they brought this home, I would have been a little over 5 years old. This car was a literal spaceship to me. If you're into these cars at all, you know they talk. Some other Nissans did too, but they have a little phonograph voice module in them that will tell you the left door's ajar, the right door's ajar, it's low on fuel, you know, lights are on. There's a few, I think there's 7 or 8 different things that will alert you of. So I just remember asking Grandma to make it talk and do stuff like that, and it was always a neat parlor trick to me. What else is interesting about the car? I mean, semi-trailing arm rear suspension, McPherson strut fronts. You know, it is what it is. It's a car of its era. So the car itself, as mentioned, is just a tick over 10,000 miles at this point. It is not a concourse, you know, 100 points car or anything. Like, I don't know how well it'll show up in camera, but they're not serious. But it's just got some, it's just lived in the garage under a cover most of its life. And it was driven. My grandmother was a public school teacher, and she would drive it to school every now and then. Stuff like that on days where it wasn't raining. Overall, the car's in pretty good shape. I've been under this car, and I can throw some pictures here and there if I can find some good ones. I don't feel like crawling under the car now. The car's the Z31s are kind of prone to rust. This thing is beautiful underneath. I mean, every bolt has its gold anti-corrosion coating on it still, you name it. She just did not drive this in the rain. And another thing to know about this car, just as a young man growing up in this house, I spent a lot of time at her house, Grandma and Grandpa's house. Children were not to be near this car, on this car, around this car, in this car. And I have a good story about that in a minute too. That was just how it was. They were children of the Depression, and when they got something, they took very good care of it. Negative condition points right now is, I believe, so I don't mind doing restorative work myself, but I am going to consult a professional on this. So it has a urethane front bumper and rear bumper, and really the only negative body stuff is this is oxidized. And I did a little slight test cleaning wax there, and I think it's going to come back. But I don't want to do anything further on this until I have a good handle on what to do, because I don't want to do anything irreparable to the car. But this is really the major negative of the car right now, this. The rear bumper has a little bit too, and it's not because it sat out in the sun. It's just, you know, I don't think the paint was ever, it does look to have a coat of wax on it, but I know my grandpa, he just used like basic turtle wax, stuff like that, nothing crazy. So that's kind of the negative there. In the picture you might have noticed, Mom's toy is still on there, as it was the day it came home from the dealer. We'll put that back down. I have that here for when I'm working on the car. So let's go ahead and open the engine bay. If I can get my hand in there, there we go. So I have been cleaning a lot in here, and I've done a ton of work. I've just got this car, like, I'll just call it substantially complete done in the past day or two. It is, as you can imagine, more or less completely stock, except for a couple things we'll talk about that I was unable to source. So yeah, it's pretty nice under here. Still has the hood liner in immaculate shape and all the warnings. One thing I've kind of left in some places is, note this. This is not dirt. This is all overspray from when they did the undercoating system on the car. I've actually removed some of that on the engine. They had a ton, like on this intake tube, the lower intake tube. And by the way, that's the hot wire MAF down there. It was all over the valve covers. Like, whoever did the undercoating that day was pretty much not caring about life too much. As you can see, no rust on any of the fasteners, looking good. So long story short, as mentioned, the car had been sitting in my aunt's garage for about 10 years. We think it last ran in 2013 or 14. Maybe a month after my grandfather passed, we think, based on the accident I mentioned. And, you know, thankfully nobody tried to start it. But, you know, when I got this car, when it was given to me, some mention was made that oh, we think it would just start right up, and thankfully nobody tried to start it. So I am into cars. I'm not a professional mechanic. I'm a shade tree mechanic, but a home mechanic. But I've worked with enough cars like this to know, especially when they have an interference engine with a timing belt, that you don't just go ripping around and see what it's going to do, especially if it's been sitting that long. And thankfully they did not. So as expected, from the records, I have records of a few things being done to the car. Number one, the AC evaporator and compressor was replaced in 1997. Also in 1997, it had the fuel injector recall performed on it, where they did the rewiring and replaced all the hoses and whatnot. Possibly the injectors, I couldn't tell. What else? Other than that, I only have records of oil changes. It had 3 oil changes in its life, maybe 4. And I say 4 because I have 3 records of Nissan doing it, and then in there right now is a K&N oil filter that I need to change before I try to start it. My grandfather must have done that. So I'm gonna guess it's had 4 oil changes in its life. I'll throw some pictures up. The engine I had the valve covers off to do the gaskets. Actually, let's just start over. Let's start from the top. Working our way down from the top, I redid all the injector hoses and clamps. These, while they are a top feed style injector, they're strange. They're like a 70s European car. They are barb on the top. So each injector has about a 40 millimeter piece of hose going to a rail, and both ends have a barb. And then the rails are joined together with barb fittings with hoses and clamps, and it's quite the Rube Goldberg setup. You know, it looked fine, but there was no way I was going to trust that. I have had a car fire before, and it's no fun. So I went ahead and did all that. Did the timing belt, tensioner, water pump, thermostat, cam seals, and front main seal. And I'm sure I'm going to miss something. Went ahead and put a new Nissan fuel pressure regulator on it, just because they are known to fail, and that one had been sitting for a long time. I put a newer power transistor on the ignition. It's interesting, there's a report from my grandfather in some of the records that it was running a little rough before he passed away. These are known to fail, and cause rough running and missing and stuff like that. So that might have been it. We'll find out. As I said, did the valve cover gaskets. I wanted to leave it as original as possible, but I did do some, I don't know if they're going to show up on the camera, but I did do some Z-spec hardware. Nissan used a ton of number 3 and 2 Phillips on this car, and I just hate that. Same deal with the timing cover, Z-spec hardware. And just hopefully it looks classy and won't upset people, but there you have it. Every piece of rubber is new on this car that I could replace. Tons of the rubber is in good shape that doesn't need replaced, like these PCV breather hoses and stuff like that. They're in tip-top shape. but every vacuum hose was replaced, every fuel hose was replaced. I mean, I'm talking every scrap of fuel hose on this car. I just did not want to trust it. Fuel filter, got all the old coolant out of it. That said, I'm going to do many coolant flushes on this car. The coolant was old in it. I would guess it was original. So need to do that. Spark plugs. Spark plug wires, obviously. So I wanted OEM black wires. They were no longer available from any of the original parts warehouses I called. I don't know if that's permanent or temporary. So much, I like NGK as a brand, but I would have preferred to not have blue spark plug wires in here. Everything else available was like really generic, made in China, you know, parts house grade stuff. You know, these are at least Japanese made parts, so you know there's a story to be had there. I put my manifold gauges on this thing. If you can believe it, it still seems to be charged, so we'll see what that does. The compressor still pumps freely by hand, so that'll be interesting to see what happens. So moving on, maybe I'll throw a couple pictures up. So I then went to test the fuel system. I knew the car had fuel in it. It was really old. The pump was shot. It was just straight locked up. So dropped the tank and cleaned the tank. Well, drained the tank, cleaned the tank. I replaced both the fuel level sender with a revised style fuel sender. The original can style are prone to fail on these. And I replaced the pump with a new Jex OEM pump, Nissan pump. Yeah, I could have gone with a Walro for cheaper and all that, but I just didn't see the need. So there was about 6.5 gallons of really putrid, nasty fuel in there. But it's out now. And what else to say mechanically? I want to talk about what my current goals are. My current goals are not to have this running and driving. Running, yes. I do not like having dead cars around my house. So my intention is to just get this thing running and mobile so that I can move it around my property. That would be very nice. This thing is still on its original Bridgestone tires made in Japan from 1984, if you can believe that. They are not dry rotted or anything. They're still holding air just fine. It's kind of hilarious. Clearly I will not be driving on those, so it needs new tires. These struts and shocks are all original. Even though they only have 10,000 miles, a couple of them are leaking down the tube bodies just from it sitting. So really it needs all new shocks and struts. The power steering is shot. The pump was leaking out of the... and let this be a lesson to you guys. Whenever you hear about, oh, the car's only got 10,000 miles, well, unless that thing was stored properly and regularly driven, that can be a big problem. And again, I've run into this a couple times. So the power steering pump was leaking ATF out of the snout. Not a big deal. Replace the pump. And the rack is also leaking, which is a known problem on these cars. So I'm going to have the rack rebuilt. I'll probably just do it myself. I don't know. We'll see if I can find parts. If not, I'll just send it out. There's a couple people that specialize in rebuilding the racks on these. The pump, I'm going to try to see if I can rebuild it. It's just so low miles and new. And really, I think the only thing wrong with it is the snout oil seal there. So yeah, that's kind of it. It sounds like not much, but I've been working on this since mid-March. Not every weekend, but most weekends. And yeah, it's coming along. So the current status, a friend of mine asked me to make a video, is I have to, I have obligations the rest of this weekend. Next weekend, I'm hoping to start the car for the first time, attempt to. You know, I've got a neighbor who's also into cars come over, and I want him to just, you know, keep an eye on all the injector connections, and I have fire extinguishers and stuff. You know, I think everything's okay, but you know, let's have an abundance of caution on this car. It's special to me. So the data plate of the car, if you want to see it. It's not a really low number car. It's 19611. All the super low number cars would be in Japan. Let's take a look at the interior. So this is where a little bit about my grandpa. My grandpa was a red car man, and The fact that the exterior is this color, knowing the man, and the interior, what you're about to see is what it is, I do think this was a custom order. I do know he did not, so I know a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, too bad it's not a turbo. I can tell you right now from conversation I did have with my grandfather in my 20s, he was actually proud that it was not a turbo. He was an engineer and he was like, it's just more stuff to break. And, you know, well, there is an ounce of truth to that. I understand why people prefer the turbo. But he specifically did not want a turbo. I will tell you this much. So while we're looking at this, you know, a 2+2 means that it has this elongated section here instead of being just a straight triangle. And then your roof is a little bit longer. One thing surprising me, and they're in fantastic shape, all the seals and everything, is it has T-tops. So he ordered it with T-tops if you did indeed order it. I don't know why. Never in my life have they been out. And this is a good time to segue into a story. There is a letter in the documentations from the car from my grandmother to the CEO of Nissan in 1991. And she is upset that her headliner is sagging in the car and wonders and is upset that it only has 5,000 miles on it in 1991. And how can this be happening? She doesn't allow children in it, this, that, and the other. I mean, it's a long letter. She does receive a response, and Nissan fixed it under goodwill, saying, you know, we stand by our work. Ironically, it needs a headliner again, but that is a common problem in these cars anyway. So let's open the door. I hope that it's going to be bright enough in here. It needs some cleaning here and there. It's in good shape though, but as you would expect, it's immaculate in here. Frankly, it still smells like a new car in here, and I'm not exaggerating. The original cassette tape deck and everything is still there. I do not know its functional status at this time. For sure the tape deck's probably broken. There is somebody that restores those, so I'll probably go ahead and send it out to them at some point. Thankfully, I know a lot of people love those digital dashes. Thankfully, it is the analog dash, which honestly, to me, that digital dash was just always a bit too much to me. Let's see if I can get on the odometer. It's not showing up, but it's 10,131 miles on it right now. So analog dash car, no cracks in her dash, no peeling, anything like that. The original, so right there, they're right here because I needed to work in a trunk. These are the original T-top bags that they go into, padded bags when you're traveling with them off. You're supposed to keep them in and buckle them back, and then the back seats are also immaculate. I have a towel under there, so it's not doing any damage. Original floor mats are here. Sorry, they're covered right now, right there, but you can see the original floor mats. This almost velour crushed velvet interior is ridiculous. This was kind of neat to find. This was in the trunk under something. It is the original, I'm gonna guess, paper floor mat thing that was there when the car was bought. It still has no area code on there for an Orlando phone number. They have since moved. This address is now like the Link bus stop area and stuff like that, downtown Orlando, if you've ever been there. Still branded Datsun at the time, and we'll go to the back of the car and look at that in a second. But you know, really just quite the example of a car here. Again, it's not a concourse d'elegance winning car or anything like that, but you see that sagging headliner will have to be dealt with soon. It definitely got an official headliner in it because it still has the placards and everything, which I'll of course try to maintain. Let us go to the trunk. Pardon, and you have to pardon me, but I have the toolkit out right now because I needed to get to the fuel pump and stuff, so that's what this phone blocks from. And a couple parts back here, but again, just, you know, usually we have some fading here, which is interesting given the car had tent and was always in the garage. And we'll have to see what we can do about that, if anything. Might be one of those things where it's just best left alone. It's interesting, this gasket is often wasted on these cars. This thing's immaculate. It's in great shape, that gasket. No rust in the hatch. A lot of these have, you know, they're wasted here. This one is not. I'll pull up the trunk area here. Just, again, I've seen so many of these Z31s on YouTube and they're just trashed. No offense to them, they're just driven cars, which is fine. These speaker covers are immaculate. Usually these are trashed. So yeah, quite the little time capsule here. Close that again, just to lay it up. To that point about Datsun, 1984 was the transition period from Datsun to Nissan. They went to their holding company, main company name, but during that transition, the car was branded with both Datsun and Nissan. 300ZX. And you can tell they're in like, they have like split personalities underneath the car. There's some stuff branded Datsun, there's some stuff branded Nissan. There, I mean, it's obviously a transitional period for the company. But anyway, that is what's going on. And again, to close this up, exactly where I'm at. Next weekend, I hope to get it running. I'm going to put fuel in it, probably about 10 gallons of premium fuel in it, with some stable, just because I don't know how much longer. I just want to keep it runnable. Put some coolant in the thing, the first set of water, I should say, with some inhibitor, and then to do several flushes of the block and heater core. From there, my intention is to replace, I don't know if I'm going to get it done this year. Like, number one, I've got a big trip coming up at some point this year where I'll be away a bit. And number two, honestly, it may not seem like I did a whole lot, everything you just saw, but this is added up higher than I thought I would. So I have a fair bit of money in this car already. So given where I'm at, I am going to research my options on suspension. Going to replace the front struts, rear shocks. I'm going to rebuild. The calipers are astoundingly good shape. They're beautiful. A lot of these are not in good shape. But I am going to rebuild them because they're 40 years old. Do the pads, do all of the brake lines, stuff like that before I'm comfortable driving this vehicle anywhere. And at that point, I'm just going to cruise it, man. You know, just going to enjoy it. Take it to some cars and coffee now and then. It's you know, when I got this out of my aunt's garage and whatever, like everyone that has seen it so far is like, man, cool car. I always wanted one. You know, especially if they're in my age bracket, they're like, man, always wanted one of these and never got it. So I just think it's gonna be an interesting car to enjoy, and I know that my grandmother will be happy knowing it ran again. So, and that people were enjoying it. So, and my grandfather too. So if you made it this far, I appreciate it, and have a good one.